Unit 4, Environmental Management Module. So, we are about midway through the course. The GAPS team and I hope that the information provided has strengthened your commitment to food safety throughout your on-farm practices. Your farm's agro-ecosystem does not operate on its own. Rather, it is a part of a greater ecosystem, which is the environment. It is important to understand how your on-farm activities impact and are impacted by the environment. In Unit 4, we will discuss the different types of environmental hazards, how to assess these risks, the requirements of an environmental management strategy, and the good agricultural practices that help to control these hazards. Let's begin. What are environmental hazards? Environmental hazards are negative impacts that occur to the environment on and off the farm as a result of production, harvesting, and post-harvesting handling of fruits and vegetables. Good agricultural practices can prevent or minimize the negative impact of farm activities on the environment. Category of environmental hazards. There are 8 categories of environmental hazards. These include: number 1, land and soil. Examples are soil erosion, poor soil structure, salinity, soil acidity and alkalinity, and sodicity. Number 2, water. Hazards may be caused by the depletion of water or poor water quality. Number 3, chemicals, as a result of the improper use of agrochemicals. Number 4, nutrients, due to the degradation of soil and water. Number 5, biodiversity, namely the loss of biodiversity due to the negative impacts on plants and animals. Number 6, waste, as a result of the depletion of natural resources and the degradation of soil, water, and air, as well as the inappropriate disposal of water. Number 7, air, such as dust, smoke, greenhouse gases, and noise. And number 8, energy, caused by the depletion of natural resources. Controlling environmental hazards. There are several steps to be taken to control environmental hazards. In identifying the hazard, growers must ask, what can happen to the environment on and off the property if something goes wrong? While assessing the risk, you will ask, what is the likelihood and consequence of the hazard occurring in the environment? To control the hazard, you ask, what good agricultural practices are required to prevent or minimize the risk of significant hazards? Lastly, when monitoring and reviewing hazards, you ask, are the good agricultural practices working, and have there been any changes that introduce new hazards? While addressing these environmental hazards, consideration should be given to the practices and requirements that are enforced and outlined in the Bahamas' Environmental Planning and Protection Bill 2019. Take some time to read more on this bill. You can find it in the resources for Unit 4. We will further discuss the 8 categories of environmental hazards and the good agricultural practices that help to control these risks. Soils. Soil is the foundation of the farm's agroecosystem and the root of the food chain. In the Bahamas, the most common type of soil found throughout the chain of islands is chalk soils. It is composed of calcium carbonate, referred to as limestone, which results in the soils being alkaline with a pH range of 7.5 to 8.5. When a soil pH is over 7 to about 8.3, it often creates challenges for the ability of a plant to absorb water. This is a characteristic of chalky soils, which are often shallow, stony, and free draining, that makes them difficult to remain fertile. Soils in the Bahamas are prone to erosion and increased salinity due to flooding. It is important to ensure that the structure of the soil is maintained for optimal plant growth. This can be done by selecting production practices suitable for the soil type and not increasing the risk of environmental degradation, such as crop rotation, composting, and no-till. A fallow period can be used to increase soil fertility, and practices implemented to improve and maintain soil structure and soil compactation in order to minimize erosion. Take some time to read the technical bulletin on soil test procedures for calcareous rockland soils for the Bahamas. Nutrients, fertilizers, and soil additives. As mentioned, due to the alkalinity found in Bahamian soils and the soil's porous structure, it is difficult to maintain adequate nutrients in the soils. Therefore, the proper use of fertilizers is important to avoid any environmental hazards such as nutrient runoff or leaching. Fertilizers and soil additives should be applied based on recommendations from a competent source, an extension officer, and considerations be taken based on the crop and soil type. Ensure that adequate facilities for proper storage, mixing, or loading of fertilizer, soil additives, and composting are known, constructed, and maintained to minimize risk to the environment. Also, the equipment used for application are to be maintained in good condition, checked annually, and records kept for each application. Water. Some islands in the Bahamas, especially the southern islands, experience drought and limited access to a fresh water resource. In such cases, water management and proper irrigation practices are essential. It is very common for cisterns or water reservoirs to be used for the collection of rainwater for the irrigation of crops during dry periods. Irrigation practices should be implemented based on crop water requirements, availability of water, and soil moisture levels. The irrigation system should be checked and maintained to ensure efficiency and minimize wastage of water. Records should be kept that provide information on the crop, date, location, volume of water irrigated, and duration. Any waste, drainage, or discharge water must be treated to minimize risk. Using a water management plan will optimize water usage and reduce waste. Chemicals, plant protection products, and other inputs. The use of agrochemicals is a major concern on farms, and it is important to ensure that its application is conducted appropriately to prevent risk to the environment and workers' health. There are several ways to ensure this. Farm workers should be trained for chemical application. The use of integrated pest management approaches to minimize the use of chemicals. Some examples include the use of ground cover to reduce weeds that harbor pests, the use of neem or other biological pest control, composting, and the introduction of beneficial pests such as ladybugs. If you have to use chemicals, select agrochemicals that minimize the negative effect on the environment. It is important, extremely important, to follow the instructions on the product labels before use. Consider a crop rotation strategy to avoid pest or disease resistance. Use appropriate volumes of chemicals mixed to minimize surplus. Any surplus chemical mixes or tank washings should be disposed to minimize risk. Obsolete chemicals should be identified kept secure, and disposed responsibly. Records of chemical application for each crop should be kept, along with relevant details. You should also keep records of chemicals held in storage. You will find a few useful links in the resources for Unit 4. Waste management. Implement a waste management plan that 1. Identifies waste products generated. 2. Uses practices to minimize waste generation. 3. Includes ways to reuse, recycle, and dispose of waste. And 4. Records activities. Energy efficiency. Electricity in farm operations has become an expensive cost of production. It is important to monitor and review the consumption of electricity and fuel to ensure that efficient operation practices are being implemented. Frequent maintenance of machines and equipment can help operational efficiency and save energy. If possible, farms can consider the use of renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and biomass. Biodiversity. Biodiversity is the measure of variation of plants and animals that exist in an ecosystem. Often, farm activities such as land preparation and the use of harmful chemicals can lead to the loss of biodiversity. It is important that when preparing your farm layout and production plan, you comply with regulations concerning plant or animal species to ensure conservation of protected species. Additionally, measures should take into account native plant and animal species, including native vegetation areas, wildlife corridors or reserves, and vegetation areas on or near the bank of waterways, blue holes, and mangroves or in coastal areas. Read The State of the Bahamas' Biodiversity for Food and Agriculture to learn more on the threats to biodiversity and ways to reduce the impacts. Air or noise. Agriculture is a major contributor to climate change due to its activities emitting greenhouse gases. Although the Bahamas' emission of greenhouse gases is low from a global perspective, using practices such as crop rotation, no-till, and nutrient recycling in composting can ensure that there isn't an increase in greenhouse gas emission. Also, to prevent air pollution, the management of offensive odors, smoke, dust, and noise during production practices can minimize impact on neighboring property and surrounding areas. We hope that you are already implementing some of the good agricultural practices that can reduce environmental hazards. We also hope you will consider some of the suggested practices to further conserve your on-farm and surrounding environment. Be sure to watch Unit 5, Worker Health, Safety, and Welfare module.